Hi, boys and girls. Welcome back. Today we are going to continue reading from Dragon of the Red Dawn, and we are going to read chapter 2. And just like with chapter 1, today we're going to answer questions using specific details from a text to show understanding. Now, before we start reading chapter 2, I want to review chapter 1 with you. In chapter 1, you were introduced to Jack and Annie and Teddy and Kathleen. And Teddy and Kathleen came to give Jack and Annie a mission. And their mission was from Morgan to have Jack and Annie search for 4 secrets of happiness to share with Merlin. And we learned that the first place they were going was Japan. So today, as I am reading chapter 2 to you, I am going to stop every so often to ask you questions, and I will pause to give you a minute to find evidence in the text and to think about an answer, and then I'll share my thoughts with you. Okay. To answer questions at the end of the chapter today, we are going to be writing a short response. And so I just wanted to review with you what a short response is. Now, I know we've written a lot of these this year, but sometimes it's good to just review what the requirements are. And so when you're writing a short response, you have to remember that it has to have at least 3 sentences. And these sentences are a claim. Your first sentence is a claim. And a claim is when you restate the question and you give an answer from your brain. You're making an inference. Remember, the claim does not have any details from the text. Your second sentence is your very first detail. And this is where you're going to prove your answer. You're going to give evidence from the text. And you're going to start that sentence with a sentence starter, like in the text it says. Your second detail is going to be the last sentence. And this sentence should start with another sentence starter like also, or the text also says. And this is also going to prove your claim. It's going to prove your answer, support it. So at the end of reading chapter 2 today, I will model a short response for you so you can see what a short response looks like. Okay, so we're going to read chapter 2, The Imperial Garden. When I read that title, I think already of maybe the setting of this chapter. Maybe the setting has changed. Okay, here we go. Jack opened his eyes. Soft morning light shone across the floor of the treehouse. Pink flowers bloomed on a branch outside the window. Jack and Annie were wearing brown baggy pants and brown silk robes with blue sashes. On their feet were stiff white socks and straw sandals. Jack's backpack had turned into a burlap bag. There. Are we wearing bathrobes? Asked Jack. I think they're called kimonos, said Annie. Oh, right, said Jack. Where'd we land exactly? Jack and Annie looked out the window. Below the treehouse was a beautiful garden filled with cherry trees and long-leafed willows. A waterfall tumbled into a sparkling green pool. So after I read the first page of this chapter, I think that the setting of the story has changed. Now, if we remember back in the first chapter, they were in Frog Creek, Pennsylvania, and they were at their house, and they were in their tree house. And as I'm reading more and look at some of the evidence in this chapter, I notice that they're still in their tree house, but the rest of the setting has changed a little bit. What evidence do you see in the text that might show that they're in a different place than home? Yes, if I'm looking at this, I see at the bottom it says, below the treehouse was a beautiful garden filled with cherry trees and long-leafed willows. And it also says that a waterfall tumbled into a sparkling green pool. So that might be evidence that tells me that the setting has changed for Jack and Annie. Okay, I'm going to continue reading. Wow, said Annie. Jack opened the Japan book and found a painting that looked like the garden. He read aloud to Annie. In the 1600s, the imperial garden surrounded the imperial palace in the capital city of Japan. The city was called Edo. In the mid 1800s, its name was changed to Tokyo. Tokyo? Said Annie. I've always wanted to go to Tokyo. Me too, said Jack. He read on. The late 1600s in Japan were years of peace and prosperity. Art and culture thrived. But it was a time when the country was completely closed to the outside world. No one was allowed to come in. The citizens of Edo were frequently checked to make sure they had passports. What's a passport exactly? Said Annie. It's an official booklet that says who you are, said Jack. It also lists the different countries you travel to. He read more. Now, before I go to the next page, I want you to notice the way some of the words are printed on this page. If you notice, there are some bold print on this page. And what that print is are facts from the research guidebook that Jack is reading from. Okay, oops. Go back and move this out of our way. Okay. Anyone who did not have a passport was considered a spy and punished severely. Uh-oh, said Annie. We don't have passports. Yeah, that's a problem, said Jack. Hey, what if we used the wand of Dianthus to make passports? Said Annie. Good idea, said Jack. He peeked inside his bag. Good, the wand of Dianthus was there. Wait, said Annie. We can't. Remember the rules? We can only use the magic wand for the good of others. Oh, right, said Jack. And we have to try our hardest before we use the wand, said Annie. We haven't tried anything yet, said Jack. I guess we should just start looking for a secret of happiness and hope no one catches us, said Annie. Shh, said Jack. Listen. A bell was ringing in the distance. The ringing grew louder. Then came the sound of horses. Jack and Annie crouched down. They raised their heads just high enough to peek out the window. Through the flowery tree branches, they saw a small procession coming through the garden. The man leading the procession was ringing a bell. 2 men walked behind him, holding up banners behind them. 4 men rode slowly on horseback. They all wore baggy trousers and puffy shirts. Their heads were shaved, except for knots of black hair. Each had 2 swords, a long one and a short one, hanging from his belt. So let's think back to the beginning of this page. What is Jack and Annie's problem? Yeah, I'm noticing when I read back that Jack and Annie didn't have passports. And so they decided that they wanted to use the wand of Dianthus, but they quickly realized that they couldn't use the wand of Dianthus because it wasn't being used for the good of others. And they also hadn't tried anything else. So Jack and Annie haven't solved that problem yet. At the very end of the procession rode a man in a billowing purple robe and a small purple hat. Red tassels hung from the bridle of his large black horse. Jack looked at their research book again. He found a picture that looked like the man on the black horse. He read the caption to himself. In the 1600s, the military ruler known as the shogun lived in the center of the imperial garden in a palace that had hundreds of rooms. The last guy is a shogun, Jack whispered to Annie. He lives in a big palace in the garden. He kept reading. Often, the shogun's warriors traveled with him. They were called samurai. Oh, man, whispered Jack. Those other guys are samurai. He and Annie had barely escaped an armored samurai on their earlier trip to Japan. Samurai were excellent horsemen Samurai were excellent horsemen, well trained in the arts of fighting. The code of the samurai was strict. Samurai did not show their feelings. They had great powers of concentration. They're gone, said Annie. Jack looked out the window. The shogun and his samurai warriors had disappeared down a tree-shaded dirt road. "We should get out of the Imperial Garden fast," said Jack. "If we stay here, we are just asking to be caught." "How do we get out?" asked Annie. Jack looked in the Japan book. He found a map of Edo. "Look," he said, pointing at the map. "We have to get over this bridge that leads away from the Imperial Garden into the city. The bridge is on the east side of the garden." "The morning sun is over there," said Annie, squinting into the sunlight. "So that must be east. Let's climb down and head that way." "Good plan. Then we'll be walking in the opposite direction of those samurai," said Jack. "Right," said Annie. She started down the rope ladder. "Be careful," said Jack. "We don't want anyone to see us sneaking around the Imperial Garden." Jack put the Japan book in his burlap bag and slung the bag over his shoulder. As he stepped onto the ladder, he nearly tripped on his kimono. "Oh, brother," he said. He held up the cloth and carefully climbed down. So Jack and Annie are trying to be very careful right now so that they're not caught by any samurai. Jack joined Annie on a wide path. A gust of dry wind carried petals from cherry trees through the air. The long branches of the willows swayed over the grass. Jack and Annie began heading east, keeping their eyes and ears open for more people. They walked past flower beds and big rocks. They walked around a pond with swans. They started down a narrow lane between blossoming cherry trees. Just as they came out from under the trees, Jack and Annie saw 4 men strolling toward them. One man was shorter and older than the others. He wore a straw hat and a tattered brown coat and used a walking stick. The other 3 had shaved heads with top knots, and 2 swords hung from each of their belts. "Samurai," whispered Jack. "Yikes," said Annie. "Run," said Jack. Jack and Annie turned around and started running back down the narrow lane. Jack heard the men running after them. "Halt!" cried a samurai. Jack grabbed Annie's hand and they stumbled to a halt. Out of breath, they turned to face the 3 samurai who were rushing toward them. "Who are you?" one of the samurai barked. He was holding up a sword. "Why do you run from us? Are you spies?" Just as Jack was about to answer, he heard a voice shout, "Baku! Koto!" The man with the walking stick and straw hat was hurrying toward them. "Baku! Koto! What are you doing here?" he called out to Jack and Annie. "Why did you not wait for me at the bridge?" So as we end this chapter, I wonder how Jack and Annie are feeling. Let's think about what just happened. How might they be feeling? Well, my thoughts are that they're maybe confused because they have a voice that's shouting at them, Baku and Koto, and a man with a walking stick and straw hat is hurrying toward them. So I'm wondering if they're confused or even scared. Okay, so as I promised, we are going to I'm going to write a short response for you before you practice on your own. So the question is, why couldn't Jack and Annie use the wand of Dianthus to make passports? So I am going to, let me get this out of the way, go to the excerpt that talks about the passports. And I'm just going to reread some of this. "Anyone who did not have a passport was considered a spy and punished severely." "Uh-oh," said Annie. "We don't have passports." "Yeah, that's a problem," said Jack. "Hey, what if we use the wand of Dianthus to make passports?" said Annie. "Good idea," said Jack. He peeked inside his bag. Good, the wand of Dianthus was there. Wait, said Annie. "We can't. Remember the rules? We can only use the magic wand for the good of others." So as I'm looking at what Annie is saying, I'm thinking that they can't use the wand of Dianthus because they wouldn't be following the rules. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to restate with my answer. Jack and Annie couldn't use the wand of Dianthus to make passports because they would be breaking the rules. Okay, so now I have to go find a detail. How would that be breaking the rules? So I'm going to go back to the excerpt, and it says that they can only use the magic wand for the good of others. So the text says they can only use the wand for the good of others. There's one detail. Let me go see if I can find another detail. It also says, and we have to try our hardest before we use the wand. And Jack is saying we haven't tried anything yet. So the text also says we have to try our hardest before using the wand. Okay, so I have my claim and my two details that support why Jack and Annie couldn't use the wand of Dianthus because they were breaking the rules. Today, you are going to get a chance to write 2 short responses yourself. So you're going to continue to the next slide. You're first going to fill out the culture chart, and then on the slide after that, you will begin writing your own short responses. Remember to have a claim with 2 supporting details.